The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yeah, hi. I think I might have turned on the broadcast as
No
well, but can you see my
problem.
screen?
Yes, that's fine. So I'll change back to me, Duncan.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Sorry.
Welcome to ASCI Lunchtime webinar series. I'm Monique Fennick from Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and just as the rest of our attendees are logging on, I'd like to welcome you from all over Australia and Hong Kong today to ticking all the boxes to packaging. Happy Wednesday. Health check, if you can hear me, can you please raise your hand in the control panel, please? I can see lots of hands being raised, so that's a very good sign. Thank you for that. Our agenda today is an introduction and presentations from two experts with Q&A kept till the very end, please. Questions can be typed into the chat box and addressed at the close. This webinar will run for a full hour. If you have any membership inquiries or if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover in our lunchtime webinar series in the future, please let us know via inquiries@asci.org.au. Today's topic, ticking all the boxes in packaging, is going to give you a local and an international perspective. From local, we have Jayne Paramor, Sustainability Manager for APCO. You may know Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation very well. And also we have Duncan Grucock, COO, Asia Pacific for AdJuno. And if you don't know AdJuno, many of the world's leading retailers choose to use AdJuno's compliance, product life cycle management and supply chain solutions. So welcome to both those presenters. I will now change my presenting screen over to you, Jayne.
Thank you, Monique. There we are. Let me just... And there we go. Monique, thank you very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here representing APCO today. I see that there are a very large group of you joining the session this afternoon, which, given the change in approach to packaging over the last 18 months or so, certainly testifies to the fact that people are increasingly interested in this topic and really carefully considering what their next moves are in the packaging space. I am just going to make a slight adjustment here and we will be in control. There we are. Let's go forward there. I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction to APCO today. Some of you may be familiar with APCO and the work that we do. For those of you who haven't heard of us or don't know too much about us, I'd just like to take you through a little bit about what we're doing and where we're driving the packaging agenda at the moment. I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the work that has gone before, particularly in the last 18 months or so, and some of the key outcomes that have emerged from that, and some of the materials that we're in the process of producing and which will be made available towards the end of the year as the resources become available. So we'll just start with a bit of a rundown on APCO. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are what is known as a co-regulatory body. The covenant which we actually administer was first developed back in 1999, and the co-regulatory model is an agreement between government and industry to address issues around packaging across the Australian landscape. We have representation at the federal level, and the regulation, which is known as the National Environment Protection Measure for Used Packaging Materials, is the instrument that actually convenes the organisation. That legislation or measure, I guess you should call it, is actually reflected at state, territory, and we work also with local government levels across Australia. So we have visibility right across the landscape in terms of packaging coming into the system through industry, and then in terms of the waste and resource recovery management side of the process at the other end of that spectrum. Essentially, we are a product stewardship model for packaging, and that's why we sit neatly in the middle of that circle, trying to address the issues in terms of managing the stewardship for the materials coming in and out of our system. The current iteration of the covenant was stated back in 2017, so we are working on quite a new and updated version of that document, which is conscious of the changes that had been predicted and also that we had seen in the marketplace in the preceding years. So we have actually adjusted ourselves and brought ourselves quite a way forward into the situation as it lies at the moment. The packaging supply chain, as many of you will know, is a very big beast, if you like. It's not more than just the companies who manufacture the packaging. It's made up of importers and suppliers, right from one end of the process to the other. And as I mentioned, APCO sits in the centre of that, with also a remit towards the other end of the spectrum, where we actually look at the resource recovery and reprocessing of materials and bringing them back into the system to create better circularity. Oh, there we are. In terms of the work we do, we are focused in 4 areas. The remit that we have is basically around minimising the impact of packaging, particularly on our environment, and also minimising the resource usage across the packaging sector. In terms of the 4 key areas that we're focused on, packaging design, of course, is very much the first step in the process. We need to look at excessive packaging. We need to look at necessary packaging. We need to be familiar and aware of the materials that are going through the system and the potential they have in terms of reusability and recyclability at the end of that process. We also look at the entire system. As I said, we sit neatly in the middle of that, and we can concentrate on the capacity building that's required in order to change the landscape and improve the sustainability outcomes across it. We also undertake educational activities, working with consumers to understand how best to recycle their packaging and handle their packaging at end of life, and also across industry in terms of education around material complexities and similar problems that cause hiccups in the resource recovery process at the end of that. And we focus very heavily on material circularity. You may be conscious of the discussion around circular economies these days. We are seeing it across industry in every sector. It's not just packaging, but we are very much focused on trying to improve the circularity of the resources that we use within our sector, and that's a very much a driving force for APCO's work program. We've got a little poll going on at the moment. I just wanted to get a gauge of how many of you are aware of the 2025 packaging targets. I believe if you look at your dashboard, there's a small poll section which allows you to answer one of the questions. So let me just pull that up, and I might invite you to give me an idea of how familiar you are with the 2025 targets and whether or not your business has started considering the steps that they need to take in terms of the way that they're going to achieve these objectives. To explain those targets a little more, back in 2018, around April last year, the federal government came out with an objective of trying to improve the packaging landscape as issues around plastic pollution and similar problems with recycling in the wake of the China sword became major issues across the industry, right across Australia and around the world. The first target that was announced was the objective of achieving 100% of packaging to be reusable, recyclable or compostable by 2025. APCO, as the administering organisation in the packaging sector, looked at that target, and we thought about some other things that needed to go alongside that. So we proposed, and the government subsequently endorsed, 3 additional targets, which were designed to reinforce the capacity of achieving that first one. So the major one there is that 70% of plastic packaging will be recycled, reused or composted in an effort to reduce the plastic pollution issues that we are facing around our coastlines, particularly in our marine environments. In addition to that, we were seeking to ensure that 30% average recycled content was used across all packaging. Of course, it's not recycled unless it's being reused, so getting it back into the marketplace was a priority in order to support that main target. And in addition to that, seeing some of the issues that we're facing around problematic and unnecessary single-use plastics entering the environment, we decided to include a phase-out program around packaging to look at packaging that falls under those categories and see what the best alternatives are for those materials. So that has basically come together to form what we're calling the 2025 National Packaging Targets. The federal and state governments have endorsed that, and we are working very closely with industry in order to achieve that. So it sounds to me like not all of you are very familiar with the fact that those targets are out there. So I'm glad to be able to bring you up to speed with that. And if there's any more information that you'd like around them, please feel free to contact me afterwards. I'd be more than happy to speak to you in more detail about that. I'm going to close that poll now. In fact, I think Monique may already have done that. So we'll move on to the next slide there. So as a result of those targets, APCO came to set up a number of working groups in order to look at areas that needed consideration in the achievement of them. And we created 5 working groups around what we decided were problematic materials in the marketplace. Now, when I say we decided, APCO has a very big stakeholder audience right across industry and government, and we did a fairly comprehensive consultation on this process and looked at what industry was telling us was causing them grief, and these were the key areas that we focused on. So we produced a number of guides around those particular materials, and out of those guides and the issues that they threw up, we produced a list of priority projects for this year. And this has been pretty much the work agenda for APCO for the last 9 or 10 months. As you can see from the chart that's appearing on your screen at the moment, and I'm hoping that's not too clunky with the animation on there, the project numbers are listed down the left-hand sides of each of those boxes below the target arrows, and they are all driving towards the packaging targets. As you can see, there is duplication across some areas, so many of the projects that we're working on have application against a number of the different targets, but all of them will come together to produce what we're calling phase 1 of the implementation process, and that is to understand more about what is going on in the marketplace at the moment across Australia and the world to a degree as well. We're having a good look out there too. So key findings have come out of those work groups. In terms of the challenges, looking at things like glass, we have low recovery rates, and there's a lot of breakage going on in terms of the curbside collection systems. Consumers are not putting their glass into the right bins, and we're having trouble in terms of reclaiming that material coming out and going into landfill. And we also have very limited and low value markets for broken glass at the end of the process. Interestingly, we're seeing a lot of innovation in this area. I was up at a MRF on the Central Coast a few weeks ago, and I saw the processing of glass, which has been reduced back down to construction grade sand. And the organisation that we were with at the time were in the process of trying to have this certified for use in construction. So we're seeing good, clever ideas coming out at the moment, and technology is actually coming up to fill some of those gaps. Going further on, we looked at expanded polystyrene. This has been a major issue, particularly in terms of its capacity to escape into the environment. We have issues with recovery rates in this country as well, just based on the fact that there is not a general curbside collection system in place for EPS, extended polystyrene. And it also has major issues in terms of ending up in landfill because of the size and the space that it takes up, given that it's a foamed product. So we're looking at the moment as to how we've address this issue in terms of collection capacity. We have dedicated collection systems in place at the moment, but they're not necessarily accessible to enough of the population to make them viable. And the problem of end markets is a major one in terms of actually making sure that the materials are being moved on. Interestingly, there's some work going on in construction as well at the moment around the use of polystyrene in waffle pods as fillers in brickwork and construction materials such as that. So again, the innovation's great. It's nice to see these sorts of things being thought about in new ways. We also moved on to polymer-coated paperboards. As we're seeing at the moment, a lot of people are moving away from plastics towards fibre-based packaging materials. And of course, there's wonderful technology coming along that is providing strength additives and waterproofing and these sorts of characteristics to the paperboard. But the issues of recycling paperboard then become more significant. And again, capacity here to process some of the paper, or more of the technical papers that are coming through, is limited at the moment. So we face challenges in those areas too. We also looked at biodegradable and compostable packaging, which is a particular interest area in the single-use plastics alternatives spectrum. A lot of people are looking at compostables as an alternative, particularly for food service ware, and we're working on a couple of projects at the moment addressing how we deal with this. Again, the problem we face is the lack of capacity around composting facilities, and also a lack of understanding in the marketplace from consumers, much confusion around the terms biodegradable, compostable, what these words mean, what the definitions are, and also where people should be disposing of those materials. So this is an area that we're working on quite carefully at the moment to understand what the best pathway is to support that transition. And finally, and probably one of the more complicated of all, is the soft plastic side of things. We have a lot of issues around laminates and multiple layered polymer soft plastic compositions, which are causing problems in the processing side of things. We also have issues around collection systems, because we have RedCycle in Australia, which collects our soft plastics via our supermarket chains, and we have a great program going there. But unfortunately, it's still only touching the sides in terms of the volume that it is able to collect, and the materials that are going through MRFs are still continuing to cause problems and ending up in mixed bales of plastics, soft plastics and hard plastics. So they're not actually ending up in the destinations that they should do. So these areas were identified, and the projects that came out of that have developed into a number of areas. So what I'd like to do is just take you through some of the tools that we have available to our members to start trying to address some of these issues. In terms of the recyclability of materials going through the system, APCO partnered with an organisation called Prep Design last year. Prep has developed what they call the Packaging Recyclability Evaluation Portal, and this allows a brand owner to enter in all the information about the packaging that they are looking to use for their product, and for them to receive a report at the end of the process that it tells them whether or not the materials are recyclable within the Australian context. This product is actually working across in New Zealand as well, and is calibrated slightly differently for the New Zealand market in terms of their capacity for processing. But it does give us a clear indication in terms of design, particularly at that first stage in the process, as to how we make our packaging more recyclable. This is complemented by another tool that we have gone into partnership with from Planet Arc, which is based on the Recycling Near You website. We have a labelling program that has been developed, which is known as the Australasian Recycling Label. It is a voluntary program that is exclusively available to our members, as is the Prep tool, but it allows you the capacity to label your packaging with the correct instructions by component for materials going into the recycling bin, whether it goes into the recycling bin or into the red bin, or whether it's a return to store. In some situations, the labelling will give you instructions around, particularly with things like bottles, to crush and replace caps, these sorts of instructions that assist consumers to understand exactly what they need to do when they come to the point of disposal with these materials. We are seeing enormous uptake of this scheme at the moment. We've currently got around 15,000 SKUs on shelf in stores around Australia with these labels on them, and we have most of the major manufacturers are running through packaging reviews at the moment to look at how they implement these labels on their own packaging. There's a lot of packaging redesign going on out there at the moment, which is exciting to see. In addition to that, a document that I think may be of interest to many of you, and which is available for download again on your dashboard there, we did a material flow analysis for the packaging sector last year in conjunction with ISF here at the University of Technology in Sydney. This reports all packaging materials flowing through the Australian system, and it looks at the destinations that they are currently going to, and our rates are quite surprising. We have produced something like 4.4 million tonnes of packaging in the last 18 months, or 12 months I should say, last year, the period of this study. Of that, about 68% was collected, so that's a pretty okay rate, but it could be much better. Of that, 58% was sorted, so it was passed through the MRFs. There was only a small proportion that was sent out as residual waste directly from the MRFs. 56% of that was recovered. The issues that we have found are that for materials such as unbleached and mixed papers, we have great recovery rates, around 72%, and then subsequently very high processing rates as well. But for other materials such as plastics, we're only collecting about 32% of our plastic packaging waste. So this document has actually set the groundwork for us in terms of understanding what the marketplace looks like and what our processing capacity is. So it might be worth having a little read of that just to understand where things are at the moment, and subsequent documents that will come out from APCO will further enhance that knowledge. We also have the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines, which are available publicly. We are in the process of finalising a new version of these, which will be available next month. So we're very excited to release that. So if you're not on the APCO mailing list, sign up now and you'll be notified as to when that becomes available, and you'll be able to download that for your use within your businesses. We also work within a packaging sustainability framework, which underpins the reporting tools that are available to our members. all packagers, all brand owners in Australia are required to report to the government as to their packaging sustainability profiles every year. In each jurisdiction in which they stock product, APCO provides tools which allow them to do that once, and it is then distributed out across all the necessary jurisdictions that need to see that reporting. So this is one of the benefits of APCO membership in terms of the tools that we provide to our members. Coming up from there, though, in support of the sustainable packaging guidelines, we also have a number of new guides that will be coming out, and they are also in their final stages of development, which will accompany the packaging guidelines, the new versions. So keep an eye out for those as well, because they will give you a starting point from which to launch your packaging considerations. We're also producing a white paper which will look at how to classify packaging in terms of problematic and unnecessary, and provide pathways looking at how to seek alternatives or potentially phase out the packaging that is causing those problems. And as I mentioned, we're also producing a set of food service packaging guidelines around issues to do with compostability and biodegradability and some of those issues we find in that hospitality and food service sector. We're also looking at other labelling schemes, which we consider to be very important, particularly from a consumer education perspective, but from a business perspective as well, particularly in the compostables and biodegradability space. There is a lot of confusion, as I said, around those terms, and this is actually an area that needs clarification, particularly from people purchasing those materials, to be given certainty that they are buying materials that will successfully pass through a composting system, and also for consumers to understand what they need to do with those materials when they come to the point of disposal. The other side of the argument, as I mentioned as well, is looking at recycled content and trying to drive a marketplace for material. Of course, we don't really have a circular economy if the materials are not coming back into the system. So one of the areas that we're looking at is a labelling system. We're also looking at things like government procurement standards and requirements through those channels to ensure that there is actually a quickly establishable marketplace for recycled content. And we're seeing good responses from government looking at some of these things. Further to that, we're also working closely with Planet Arc on a national circular economy hub, which will be an information portal for people. But in a further stage of development, which will go on next year, we are actually looking to create a materials marketplace as part of that hub, which will provide people with information and access to the materials that they need and the recycled content in order to achieve some of those other objectives from the targets. Further to that, we're also working with the Australian Institute of Packaging on training capacity. So we are looking at things like the recycling label and the prep tool, giving education sessions on that. We're also looking at life cycle assessment tools and the nuances of using these materials in Australia in context of other things like the sustainable packaging guidelines. So that's covering that educational element within industry as well. And we're working with a number of different organisations internationally and locally on various projects around things like soft plastics recycling, around recycled content labelling. Of course, we're working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and WRAP in the UK, and working closely with them on the work that they're doing with the Plastic Pact over there. We're working with Boomerang Alliance here in Australia on their Plastic Free Places program to try and shift away from a lot of the single-use plastics that we're seeing in that hospitality sector. So there are a number of great initiatives going on at the moment that we hope are going to produce some very exciting results in the very near future. So really that's just the beginning. One of the other exciting things that we've seen in recent weeks is the federal government came out and made a declaration through COAG that we would no longer be sending our waste offshore. We would process it here at home. The groundwork is being put in place for the implementation of that objective. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement in this space in the next little while, and I think APCO is going to be right in the middle of it. So if you're looking for information, it's a good place to start, and we hope you'll come along this journey with us and help us to achieve those 2025 objectives. And that's it from me. Monique, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'll now change the presenter over to Duncan.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody from Hong Kong. Thank you for. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. Good afternoon from Hong Kong. Thank you for giving up some time in your lunch break to listen to my piece. So I'm based in Hong Kong. I work for a company called Juno. Today, I'd like to share some retail insights on how our customers have used our services to optimize their packaging and also implement software to support best practice to be packaging processes. So just want to give you a quick idea of who we are as a Juno. So some of you may not have heard of us. So we're part of a EV Cargo Group, which is a $1 billion pool of logistics companies. We're the software part, so we have focused on sourcing and supply chain software, and more recently we've developed a packaging module, which I'll be explaining in more detail today. So we look after clients in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. We have a UK company which looks after UK clients. Some of the clients that I'll reference today and share some experiences with in the UK and Hong Kong include Sainsbury's, who have used our services to help optimize their packaging. Also Primark and Marks and Spencer. So I'll be giving some examples through the presentation on how they've used our services. So we're very much a retail supply chain specialist company. So that's really our space. And as you can see from the slide there, we connect up retailers with their international supply chains. Obviously, it helps being based here in Hong Kong at the hub, where it's still for now the factory of the world. So we're close to factories, close to where all these cartons are being filled and loaded, and close to consolidation hubs here in Hong Kong. So some of the packaging challenges faced by our retail customer base, and some of you on this webcast will see these challenges as familiar, listed on the slide there. So I would group them as organizational challenges, consumer and government related challenges, operational supply chain challenges, and also financial challenges. So some of the organizational challenges and how we help include just aligning your different departments. You know, international supply chain involves many different groups. So buying, merchandising, quality control, QC, suppliers, your factories, and obviously ultimately your warehouse managers at destination. So it's truly an end-to-end process, and that in itself brings challenges aligning all parties in one way of working. Another example is who's the actual stakeholder and decision maker for your business's packaging processes. Does it sit with buyers who may be more focused on margin and packaging costs, or does it sit with supply chain or QC who may have other priorities in the process? So in terms of consumer and government, so you've heard earlier in this podcast around some of the government related pressure that our retailers are suffering from. Board members, consumers, customers are all asking for improved CSR processes, and we would see packaging as a key part of that. Operationally, many of our customers just suffer from lack of packaging standards, so they have too many different carton types in their supply chain, and also poor carton quality, poor carton selection, and then the specifications around the carton and the carton fills also lacking standardization. So this might sound very detailed, but we see it as a huge opportunity to improve these processes. If you just understand the sheer volume of cartons that are moving around the world, or from Asia specifically, you'll get an understanding of the size of the problem and the potential opportunity. Okay, so again, so how some of these translate into problems. So you'll see poorly packed cartons or poorly packed containers result in damage. These are some photos that we have from some of our customers. Some of our clients even have a budget when it comes to breakage. So a South African client we have has a $4 million a year breakage budget, which is purely product cost. So the size of and scale of the problem is huge, and that's purely for product and doesn't even account for reshipping or further supply chain costs. Other customers really suffer from the impact on product quality. So if garments are not packed correctly in cartons, there are issues with folds and creases leading to large amounts of rework at destination store or DC. So there's many challenges. There's a couple of examples that we've picked up. So how we try and answer and address some of those challenges. So we provide a joint service with a company called PACD. PACD are the carton optimization specialists, and we provide a joint service with them. So PACD will assist with the consulting exercise, understanding and evaluating our customers' packaging processes and supply chain, and they'll actually look at examples of how your factories are currently packing cartons and analyze the existing processes. And then we work alongside PACD to implement new processes and then help enforce compliance by implementing technology behind the revised requirements. So I'll give you some examples of how this looks later in the presentation, but essentially we're providing a joint service with PACD. So PACD will do the physical optimization and provide detailed consulting and advice, and then we'll provide the technology behind it. So in terms of the actual optimization and compliance, so PACD will, as I said, will assist with operational expertise. So typically we will, in collaboration with PACD, will take a few example styles and then go from there. So we'll analyze, for example, a bunch of shirts or footwear from a softline perspective, or we'll look at some typical difficult hardline products to move through the supply chain. It could be glassware, or it could be crockery, and we'll look at some of the examples of how your factories have packed these products, and then we'll look for opportunities to try and enhance or optimize the way they're packed. So detailed operational examples could include adding fittings into your cartons to prevent damage or breakage, or even suspending products in the cartons to, again, prevent damage or breakage in your cartons as they ship through the supply chain. So we also offer Asia-based resource, so we can actually be quite hands-on in the process. So in addition to doing the analysis up front, we can then help after implementation actually analyze the products and ensure that your suppliers and factories are meeting the requirements. So just a bit more detail on PACD's approach and our joint approach. So as mentioned earlier, so PACD will provide a consulting service and do the detailed analysis, and then we actually take the consulting service through to implementation. So once the initiatives and improvements have been identified upfront in the exploration phase, we'll then be able to implement the solution by, for example, literally helping write SOPs and write guidelines and write standards that your buyers and supply chain users can share with your factories, and then we then help to follow up with standards and enforce compliance with those standards, as you can see on the slide there. So there's lots and lots of opportunities, not just to help the environment and answer sustainability needs, but there's also lots of savings, so hard savings. So we see this as a real win-win. So a situation where not only are you meeting your regulatory needs and taking packaging out of the supply chain, which of course everybody wants to achieve, but we're also seeing really good savings from this. And I'll share some examples of some of the savings that our UK retailers have already enjoyed later in the presentation. So some of our customers even have the ability to pass savings back to the supplier. So it's actually a win-win for all parties, including the factories and suppliers themselves. So they have the ability to take some of the cost back and not necessarily even pass it back through to the retailer through the unit price. So how we actually fit into the supply chain and how the software works. So just for a minute or two on the technical side. So once the standards have been agreed with your factories, the system is, we have a system workflow which is built around ensuring your factories are complying with those standards. So we would need to link up and receive international purchase orders from our customers' ERP system. They are fed into our portal, which is a web-based portal, and then suppliers and factories need to log into the system and then actually confirm that they have received the order and confirm that they are able to pack according to the standards that have been set and agreed by our PACD service and by your packaging compliance department. So they log into the system, they confirm if the packaging, they're able to pack according to the standards, and we actually record a carton matrix in the background. So if there's a list of standard cartons or a carton library, the suppliers will view that information in the system and then be asked to confirm they can pack according to the standards. We have a rejection and escalation process where if they are unable to use a standard carton, they are able to suggest an alternate carton and then attach pictures and photos of the carton, and that can be sent down to the destination retailer compliance team, and they can approve the carton. So you actually have control and standardization of your transit cartons. So to give an idea of some of the benefits, so as I said, there's many benefits, and I guess from a retail supply chain perspective, the most convincing of the benefits are hard savings, which is great. We've had good examples from the UK retail market, the examples being Marks and Spencer, who were able to improve their container fill from 85 on average to 96%, which is very high in the industry. And they were able to do this purely from optimizing cartons, so optimizing the fill of inner cartons, outer cartons, which led to improved optimization on pallets, and then improving the pallet fill in the overall container. So really, eye-watering improvements, so really impressive numbers from Marks and Spencer's. Another customer, Primark, were able to take around £6 million a year out of their freight costs, again due to optimization. And then from a packaging reduction, they were able to reduce their overall use of corrugated packaging materials by around 38%, again by increasing the carton fill, inner carton and outer carton fill. So there's some really impressive potential savings available. One caveat would be the savings do vary in a couple of areas. They vary by the actual category of the product. So some products are more ripe for improvement. We also find across our customer base that the savings vary depending on where the customers are at in their journey or in their evolution in terms of carton improvements. So some of our customers have already engaged over the years in carton optimization. They've already done the process I explained earlier that we offer with PACD. Other customers in Australia, New Zealand haven't even perhaps considered optimizing their carton processes, or they feel they don't have the leverage or control over their factories or supplier base in order to implement changes, which means the savings that they are able to potentially offer are much greater because they're less far down the evolution. So some other perhaps indirect benefits, I think the key one to call out is just this ability to standardize packaging across the vendors. So again, another UK customer, Marks and Spencer's, they had a situation a couple of years ago where they were using more than 3,000 different carton types for soft lines, so for their garments, which meant you very difficult to get any kind of consistency in terms of how they were loading containers and shipping containers, and very difficult to ensure that cartons were going to meet destination warehousing, storage or racking or automation requirements. So that was a huge problem for them. But by looking at going through the optimization process, they've actually been able to reduce the number of cartons flowing through their supply chain. So the number of different carton types, they've been managed to reduce it from around 3,000 to just around 12 different standard cartons. So that's the move that we're seeing from leading retailers, particularly with soft lines. They're trying to standardize the different carton types that are being used in the supply chain. So if I can just deep dive on one further slide in terms of our technology, because you might want to understand a little bit of how that actually looks like and how it helps. So the picture on the bottom right of your screen might look a bit grainy, but essentially that's the step where a factory or supplier will log on to through our portal, and then they'll be able to look at the purchase order. So look at the order number and the style or SKUs that they are producing for our retailers. They can look into the system, and then they can then confirm the packaging they're going to use. So in the bottom half of the screen, if the system prompts them to pick from an approved carton type, and we have a carton matrix in the background that lists all the approved carton types. So they're prompted or pushed to try and use one of the standard approved carton types. There's a second tab there called alternate carton types. So some of our retailers might accept from a range of also approved carton types, but not their preferred carton types. So the factories can select from alternate carton type and confirm that through the system. If they're not able to use a standard carton type, and we still find around 15 to 20% of cartons, even after optimization, can't be filled using standard carton types. There may be an ad hoc promotion, or there may be a particular SKU that is unable to be used, unable to be packed in a standard carton. Then they're able to offer a custom carton type. And for that process, they fill out all the different carton details in the system, and they attach a photo of the carton, both before it's been filled and after it's been filled. And that information, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is then fed through to the destination retailer, and they have the ability to then approve or reject. So we keep all of this history in the system. And again, for those of you perhaps who are asking how you can enforce compliance and how you can drive usage and drive your factories and suppliers to follow the standards, that's really important, because some of our customers are able to actually penalize suppliers and factories if they don't follow the standards. One way they can do that practically is by asking them to pay for light load. So if there's, what that means in the industry, if there's space in the container, so if they're unable to fill the container for a factory load, a full container load, some of our customers actually penalize the factory and ask them to pay for the gap and pay for shipping empty space effectively. So that is a punitive way, but it's also an attempt to drive the win-wins from packaging optimization. And we find that if retailers explain to the suppliers that they'll also benefit from reducing the amount of packaging they're using, then we find the suppliers and factories are prepared to follow these standards and comply. Just one other system comment for those of you who work in international supply chain and want to understand how this process can be pushed through. We can also build a block in the process. So we will link this up with your factory's container bookings when they book with a logistics provider. So you can build a hard stop in the process and say, you must confirm your packaging and how you've packed the product before you can actually ship the product. So that helps, again, promote compliance. And by implementing that process, some UK retailers have been able to actually get around 100% compliance of the compliance step. So making sure all factories and suppliers are following the process strictly. Okay, so that's just some background on how the software works behind the operations. We can expand the software also has the opportunity to share documentation, share SOPs, share guidelines, and have your supplier and factory base confirm that they've read various guidelines. You can also share videos to help explain and guide the factories and suppliers on how they need to pack cartons and how they need to pack containers. So there's other functionality there to increase the buy-in of the project with your factory base. So just some simple case studies. They probably speak for themselves in terms of the slides on how, again, some of our customers have been able to improve carton and container utilization through optimization. So just an example here of a t-shirt and how being able to increase the actual the outer carton fill with more pieces, and how that leads on to better pallet fill and container fill. So just a really simple example from a t-shirt perspective, and a similar example of shoes. Again, how optimizing how the shoes are actually packed can improve overall utilization benefits. So there's a couple of simple examples, but really we see the opportunity across all categories. I talked very briefly around damage and breakage around some products such as mirrors or crockery earlier in the presentation. So it's not just restricted to garments and soft lines. Okay, just to finish off, I think there's similar messages on this slide, so I'll skip through fairly quickly on some of the benefits. So just going back to the common problem of poorly packed or poorly optimized or poorly designed cartons, which result in damage and inefficiencies, environmental costs due to overuse of packaging, and then unnecessary freight costs because of too much air and empty space being shipped. So that is what we're looking to try and address. We've had several projects so far, as I've mentioned, in this space, supporting particularly UK, South Africa, and US retailers to improve. And I'd just like to leave you with those messages there on the packaging compliance and 3 key takeaways. So how we can help you with efficient packaging, which has both an ethical and sustainable benefit and also a financial benefit. So thank you for listening. Hope that was interesting, and I was at least able to share a few recent current retail examples with you. So back over to Monique.
Thank you, Duncan. That's been fantastic. So thanks for joining us today for our webinar on packaging. And I think there's a lot of really great advice there. I'll share the results from our poll with you so that you can see that we still have a way to go in terms of considering 2025 targets, but that's a good thing. It means that there's plenty of room for learning through this channel, the webinar series, and please let us know what you'd like to hear more about. I don't have any questions in the chat box, so I'm assuming that you're all thinking about that, but more than happy to share with you offline the recorded version of this webinar. And you can see in the handout section that there are 3 documents, one from each party, each of us 3, for more information. Thanks so much for joining us. You have 10 minutes for a quick toilet break and maybe a sandwich before you get back to the office. So appreciate your time, and thanks again.
Thank you, Monique.
Thanks, Jayne. Thanks, Duncan.
Okay, thank you guys. All the best.